All of you. I'm truly honored to have been asked to chair the panel on Islamic and African law within the Transatlantic Young Scholars Conference. And first of all, I welcome all colleagues who are connected to this webinar this afternoon. And I would like also to greet and to thank the President of American Society of Comparative Law, Professor Richard Kay, and the President of the Young Comparatives Committee, Antonia Baraggia, and last but not least, the President of the Italian Association of Comparative Law, Professor Zeno Zenkovic, as well as the board members I see connected before. I would have been my great pleasure to meet you all in person in Perugia, but I am sure nevertheless that this virtual meeting will be extremely stimulating and fruitful as the other I have participated to so far. Let me introduce myself. I teach public comparative law in the University of Parma, and my areas of interest, in addition to classical themes like hate speech, are related to the various challenges that today's science poses to law. From the use of genetic databases for criminal purposes to novel food, the so-called food of the future produced using new technologies. But the reason why I suppose the committee chose me as a panel chair today is because I am the coordinator of BRICS Parma Research Group, an observatory of BRICS countries, you know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These countries, these studies, this research group is focused on their legal system and on their legal developments. In this context, of course, South Africa has a particularly significant role as it is a bridge with the African continent. There is something else that I do not think the organizer knew, but binds me with even greater pleasure to this meeting with so many young comparatists. My first article published in an important law review was about South Africa's new, at the time, constitution. So for me, it's a return to the past that fills me with joy and expectation to see that so many young people continue to devote themselves to the study of the Rainbow Nation, as well as for others who deal with the very interesting issues related to the Islamic world, which I too worked on when I dealt with the FGM.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah,
Okay. I'm sure that today my knowledge will be further expanded by your interesting speeches. Before I give you the floor, I wanted to remind you, sorry, I heard something, but I don't know. Before I give you the floor, I wanted to remind you the only ground rules for this panel. Each one of you will have 20 minutes for your speech. Please bear in mind that in a webinar, respecting each one's time slot is greatly appreciated. I kindly ask you to introduce yourself briefly once you start your presentation for those who do not yet know you. Following your individual speeches, there will be a short Q&A session, after which we will proceed with the next panelist. To those who wish to ask a question to the panelist, please use the raise hand button and we will try to give everyone the chance to intervene. If there is any question? No? So, our first panelist is Dr. Leonardo Almeida Lage from the University of Perugia, who will make the presentation about Sharias and Constitution, the relation between Islamic and state law in Muslim countries. And so, Dr. Almeida, the floor and it's better to say the camera is yours or are yours.
Thank you, Professor SCAFFARDI. Good evening to all. Thank you also to the Italian Association of Comparative Law and the American Society of Comparative Law for giving the opportunity for many of us who are young scholars to present our thoughts, our researchers about these interesting subjects. So as Professor SCAFFARDI mentioned, the subject of my contribution is the relation between Islamic and state law in Muslim countries. I'll divide my presentation into three main blocks. First, I'd like to outline some of the methodological challenges I see when dealing with the specific case of Islamic law, Islamic culture, and the law of Islamic countries. Secondly, I would like to indicate some of my key assumptions, those starting points that, in my opinion, are necessary to understand why my research is feasible, why is it possible, and why is it relevant, even though this part has already been developed by many previous scholars. And finally, I'd like to offer some of my initial findings as it regards the constitutional discipline of the relation between classic Islamic law and state law in Muslim countries. So to begin with, I would like to offer two examples that, in my opinion, illustrate the methodological challenges in studying Islam, Islamic law, and institutions, particularly from a Western point of view. I argue that, in addition to the rigorous application of the methods for comparative legal research, we should take seriously the risks of essentialism and ethnocentrism pointed out by post-colonial and critical legal approaches to social sciences. The first example comes from the work of Alexander Dow, an 18th century Scottish Orientalist. He wrote a dissertation concerning the origin and nature of despotism in Hindustan. And he affirmed, and I quote, "The faith of Mohammad is peculiarly calculated for despotism, and it is one of the greatest causes which must fix forever the duration of that species of government in the East." Now, the author mentions a set of factors that, according to him, support his assertion. Two of these factors are too much bathing and the prohibition of consumption of alcohol. He says, quote, the frequent bathing inculcated by the Quran has, by debilitating the body, a great effect on the mind of a bewitching kind. The prohibition of wine is also favorable to despotism. It prevents that free communication of sentiment which awakens mankind from a torpid indifference to their natural rights. Therefore, according to Dow, it seems that only that one person can only be free if he or she bathes and drinks alcoholic beverages as much as Europeans do. The second example happened in the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attack against the United States. So it's a much more recent example. President George Bush declared that the United States would follow the money trail and suppress terrorist financing. The Committee on Banking of the United States Senate held a hearing on halawas and underground terrorist financing mechanisms on November of that same year. So the government seemed to have identified halawa as an important means for terrorist funding. Texts of classic Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, mentioned this word as early as the 8th century in two senses. It is both the mandate for the payment in favor of a third party and the sum of money actually paid. During the Abbasid Caliphate, for example, it was widely used to avoid the risks of transporting cash in commercial transactions between different cities. It possibly had some influence on the widespread practice of transfer of debts in medieval Europe too, which was not allowed by Roman law, mainly because of trade between Italian cities and the Muslim world. However, the key point is that hawala is simply the word in modern standard Arabic for transfer, even though its legal definition may also include the bill of exchange, the promissory note, and also an informal system of money transfer. So these two examples encapsulate the challenges I mentioned. Alexander Dow's argument about how Islam inherently entails despotism is a cautionary tale about essentialism, by which I mean the strategy underlying the representation of Islam as a rigid religion and an all-encompassing political system, with fixed attributes and a backward-looking worldview. Dow's dissertation also warns against the problem of using ethnocentrism as a lens through which we will observe and judge the other. In addition to that, the prohibition of halawa in the United States calls our attention to the bias of seeing the foreign as exotic, as necessarily and radically different. So in order to avoid replicating these patterns, I argue that comparatists should avoid speaking authoritatively about the other. Instead, consistently with Edward Said's broader idea of constructing fields of coexistence as the outcome of intellectual labor, comparatists should treat comparative law as a relational practice, as Mitchell Lesser puts it. Firstly, this implies an ethical duty of fidelity to the object of analysis, by attempting to offer an interpretation that actors within the studied legal order would generally be willing to confirm. Secondly, it means taking into consideration the particular comparative context in which the comparison takes place. These observations applied to the specific case of comparative research about Islamic and state law in Muslim countries lead to an attitude of engagement, openness to criticism, and consideration for the effects of words and assertions on the discursive and material context of subjects involved. Islam is a living tradition whose interpretation and incidence on the organization of social relations, or in other words, on the construction of the legal order, has changed and continues to change over time and across geographic spaces. To sum up, comparative researchers should be aware of representations of the Muslim world as monolithic, exotic, incapable of rule of law, and nostalgic for its past. With that, I conclude the first block. Moving on, to understand why it's possible to talk about a relation between Islamic law and state law, it is useful to indicate two basic assumptions. The first regards the distinctions between Sharia and fiqh on the one hand, and siyasa shar'iyya and qanun on the other. Diachronically, this distinction is closely connected to the paradigm shift from classic Islamic law to the law of Muslim countries. In other words, it helps us to explain how the reception, either by prestige or by imposition, of European models shifted the balance between religious law and state authority, and eventually gave rise to a coexistence of separate but connected legal orders. The second premise of this contribution regards the nature of political authority in Islamic thought. In particular, by briefly recalling the classical theory of the caliphate. Sharia, etymologically, means the path that leads to water, to the very source of life. Metaphorically, and this is the sense we see in the Quran, for example, in the Surah 45, verse 18, it refers to the path to salvation, the straight path God revealed to the Prophet Muhammad and his community. Therefore, Sharia encompasses religious dogma, rites, moral exhortations, and normative precepts. In its more restricted and legal meaning, it disciplines human conduct towards both God and fellow human beings. However, the revelation of the Quran and to the Prophet Muhammad and the acceptance of the Prophet's traditions as guidance for action did not immediately give rise to a cohesive legal order. Instead, it was the work of the pious scholars, which eventually led to the consolidation of the 4 Sunni schools of Islamic jurisprudence, that made it possible to identify the roots of or sources of law and derive from them the specific norms of behavior that Muslims ought to follow. Fiqh is the science of discovering God's will, of classifying human conduct into 5 kinds of acts: obligatory, forbidden, recommended, reprehensible, and free. Through ijtihad, or the effort of penetrating God's will in order to formulate in accordance with it the rules about ritual matters and human relations, Muslim jurists named faqih and fuqaha gradually reached consensus within each school or madhab on the body of legal rules, the corpus juris, that can be understood as the content of classic Islamic law. In spite of the confessional, personal, and most importantly for the purposes of this contribution, outside of state character of Islamic law, rulers had the power to enact edicts on matters not disciplined by Sharia and fiqh, mainly regarding the state and administration, the individual relations to the state, collection of taxes and distribution of land, and also with specific criminal matters. These edicts or decrees were called qanun. Theoretically, they were subordinate to Sharia, but in reality, ever more often, they contributed to the construction of positive state law in a dialectic relation to the tradition. Rulers were able to interfere in the respective domains of Sharia and fiqh on the one hand, and qanun on the other, not only by issuing these decrees, but also by limiting the competence, the jurisdiction of the qadi, and creating mazalim courts that were free from most limitations applicable to the Sharia courts. Eventually, over time, the reception of Western legal models in the 18th century, in the context of military decadence of the Ottoman Empire, and also the set of reforms collectively known as Tanzimat, that included the adoption of the first constitutional texts and legal codes, displaced the domain of Sharia and fiqh in favor of the positive state law. Briefly speaking, the government's intervention through qanun, the creation of state courts that took jurisdiction away from Muslim judge, and later the extinction of Sharia courts in most countries, led to the prevalence of normative production of the state. In the later stage of Abbasid Caliphate, in the 11th century, Muslim jurists began to theorize the siyasa Sharia, or politics in accordance with Sharia. One of these jurists, Al-Mawardi, was the first to formulate the theory of the caliphate in his ordinances of government. Khalifa, or caliph, translates a successor or vicar. Al-Mawardi wrote that after the death of Prophet Muhammad, the first caliph, Abu Bakr, refused the title of Khalifat Allah, choosing instead Khalifatu Rasulallah, or successor of the Messenger of God. This illustrates the fact that caliphs have no religious authority in Islam. The power of the caliph derives not from God, but from the contract that he establishes with the Muslim community. In light of the contractual nature of the caliph's power, of the bilateral effects of this contract, of the causes for its resolution, Antonio D'Emilia correctly points out that this power has a political nature, according, of course, to the Sunni definition. The subsequent development of siyasa shar'iyya contributed to the conclusion that Islam has no preferred form of government, as long as the application of Islamic law is guaranteed. In this way, Islam could claim efficacy even after the dismantling of the caliphate into several entities in the aftermath of the Mughal siege of Baghdad. So to sum up, Sharia and fiqh on the one hand and siyasa shar'iyya and kanun on the other could be interpreted to have gradually constituted two parallel, separate but connected legal orders. The reception of Western legal models changed the forms, the structures, and the realm of application of classic Islamic law. The birth of nation-states in the Muslim world, the adoption of the constitutions, and the issuance of statutes and legal codes meant, as Professor Gianluca Parolini explains, that it is no longer Islamic scholars, but rather state law and its apparatus that set and define the domain of fiqh, sharia, and that of siyasa, kanun. Because of that, it seems not only possible, but indeed necessary to compare the different ways in which countries in the contemporary Muslim world discipline the relation between Islamic and state law. The constitutional texts of Islamic countries mention Islam in their preamble or make it the religion of the state. They often affirm that Sharia or fiqh is one of the sources or the main source of legislation. Some also contain or alternatively contain a repugnancy clause, according to which any statute or legislative act contrary to the tenets of Sharia will be void and deprived of legal effect. Finally, some of them may include the requirement that the head of state must be a Muslim believer. Now, since the application of these provisions vary among Muslim countries and is connected to their forms of government, it is useful to construct comparative categories that account for these differences. One of the ways in which it is possible to apply the comparative methods and to further the understanding of the interactions between Islamic law and state law is to organize them into archetypical variations. Therefore, by studying the circulation of normative models and identifying differences and similarities, it would seem possible to divide constitutional systems into archetypical variations, ranging from the secularized constitutional systems such as Turkey and the countries of Central Asia that used to be part of the former Soviet Union.
To, 3 minutes left, please.
How many, Professor?
3 minutes left.
3 minutes, thank you. Ranging from these secular countries to constitutional systems that try to integrate more fully both the Islamic and state components, such as the Iran after the 1979 revolution and the Taliban regime in Afghanistan before the American invasion. However, I think it would be more fruitful to look for narrower, more precise elements in the constitutional order that may provide a look for the interactions between these two legal orders. One of these elements is the clauses that establish that Sharia and fiqh are the sources of state law, or that establish a repugnancy clause. Because if we look at these provisions and how the constitutional systems make them operative, we may see that different wording, the different textual data may lead to very different outcomes. So, for example, we have countries that have no clauses establishing in their constitution that Sharia is a source of national legislation. This is the case of Turkey and those countries of the Central Asia that are highly secularized, but it is also the case of Tunisia and Morocco, that although do not have these this provision, have, for example, in family law, make it a positive law, the content of Islamic fiqh. And also both Tunisia in its most recent constitution requires the head of state to be a Muslim. So there is, in addition to the democratic legitimation, also religious legitimation. And the monarch in Morocco is also called the Prince of Believers, a title that was afforded to the caliphs before. So here is an example of how the lack of this provision may lead to very different results. The same kind of differences we can observe in countries that do adopt these clauses. So since my time is almost complete, I will finish by just indicating what I think would be the next step for my research, which is looking for the ways in which each legal system reviews the compatibility between state legislation and Sharia. One of the cases which is quite interesting is that of Pakistan, that has a repugnancy clause, and in 2015 judged that the penalty of whipping for drinking alcoholic beverages was not compatible with Sharia. And as a result of this judgment by the Federal Sharia Court in Pakistan, they demanded that the government would amend the law that previously had this penalty included. So here we can see how even though the Sharia Federal Court has the power to judge the compatibility, it is still the government, the secular government's job to.
Excuse me, Dr. Almeida, we cannot hear more you. Okay. In the meanwhile, we are waiting to be reconnected with Dr. Almeida. I want to say again, good morning for him to the president, to Professor Richard Kay, that is with us today. So thank you very much. I cannot hear you. You have to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it last time. I'm sure this will be an interesting one too. I've already learned some.
Okay, me too. So really interesting.
I'm sorry, I lost my connection for a moment.
Yes, me too. And so are you more reconnected now? Can you hear that, Dr. Almeida?
Yes, I'm
okay.
fully
I
functional.
can't hear you, but probably you are around. So the important is to hear the voice. Okay, I can see you now. Okay, so thank you for your interesting presentation. And now I saw some hands, and so question. The only thing that I ask you is to present yourself briefly in a minute, only to know who you are, because I know something of you that is quite interesting.
Yes, as Professor SCAFFARDI mentioned before, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Perugia currently in the last year. My field of research is obviously comparative public law, and the title of my research project is Sharia e Costituzione dal diritto islamico al diritto dei paesi islamici.
Okay, but do you have your degree in Italy or abroad?
No, both my bachelor and master's degree are Brazilian. I am Brazilian.
Okay.
And so.
Thank you for this. So we are more international. So the first question is for Professor Vincenzo Zeno-Zenkovic.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Almeida, for your presentation. If I may just do a few comments and suggestions. The first comment is that I think it's not irrelevant, the fact that Sharia and Kanun have the same etymological root. Sharia is shara, that is road, which is straight, and Kanun is from Greek, and that gives the same idea of something that is a cane, which obviously canes are not, they're straight. So this is just to give you it's significant, this common etymology, and how in the Arab and let's say the Arab world, Kanun is well the law. That is first element. Second element I would like to point out, but this seems quite obvious for anybody who's working on Islamic law, is keeping always in mind Edward Said's lesson about Orientalism, how we Westerners imagine sort of the Eastern world, the Arab and Islamic world, which is more or less how they could imagine from the Arab world, they can imagine Europe. So just to point out, this is very important as comparatives, because I think Edward Said's point of view is important for us comparatives. And so how difficult it is to place ourselves in someone else's shoes. And finally, I think I hope that I see the day in which somehow Islamic law is simply a historical discipline, and instead what we are interested in, just like Roman law, and what we are interested in is the legal systems of Islamic countries, which is somehow much more complex, and Islamic countries go from Indonesia to Tajikistan to Morocco, or to you can find them go down in Africa. So I think this is, if we start looking at Islamic countries, I think that it makes much more sense from a comparative perspective, rather than simply making history with looking at 8th century, 9th century, sort of the various Islamic schools. We are interested in how the law in action is today in Islamic countries. That's the only suggestions I have for your paper. But I think also the contract, I saw ZAVAREI had some comments when you suggested sort of that there's a contract between the Caliph and the prince and his and the people. So and as he has ZAVAREI, I see has a contractual approach. So I was wondering if there was some conflict of views on this point. But that's left to the discussion of the panel.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything to Professor Zenkovic?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Zeno-Zenkovic. I do agree with your points about the etymology of the words Sharia and Kanun, and especially with with the importance of Edward Said's thesis on Orientalism. Some comparatists, some Western scholars of Islamic law have said in the past that the thesis of Orientalism was not applicable to law, which I do not agree with. I think that even if you look at some of the most important Western scholars of Islamic law, such as Joseph Shasht, we can see an attitude of not exactly superiority, but a construction of a single narrative that is supposed to encapsulate all of that very complex and very dynamic tradition. So I think having this in mind helps us reach a much more rigorous outcome as a result of the research. And I also agree with the importance of looking at the law of Islamic countries much more than the historical classical work in the field of comparative law, and it is the subject of my research. Unfortunately, at the end I had a little less time, but my proposal is exactly to understand how the phenomena of religion and state happens in Muslim countries. Even to say, if that's the case, obviously, that it doesn't have a very, very close connection, which might also be the case in some countries.
Thank you again. So I cannot see any other questions. So the next one is Jihane BENARAFA. She came from the Università di Milano, Statale di Milano, and she will speak about I termini sharaitici e la traduttologia.
Thank you. My name is Jihane BENARAFA, and I'm a third year's PhD student at the University of Milan. My work is focused in Islamic finance and specifically Islamic insurance, takaful. Today, my presentation will address the translation of Arabic terms used in Islamic law in Western language and the issue they may arise. My presentation will be in Italian, as the example provided will be based on my experience as an Italian scholar. Thank you. Innanzitutto vorrei ringraziare sentitamente l'Associazione Italiana di Diritto Comparato, il professor Vincenzo Zeno Zinkofic e la professoressa Lucia SCAFFARDI per la loro disponibilità e per questa occasione che permette un confronto proficuo tra i giuristi interessati alle tematiche attinenti alla comparazione giuridica. Essendo marocchina di nascita ma residente in Italia da molti anni, sento l'intervento di oggi particolarmente vicino al mio vissuto e al mio presente. Mi piace pensare di rappresentare quel ponte tra la mia cultura d'origine e il profondo sentimento che ad essa mi lega e il mondo occidentale, essendo diventata l'Italia ormai il mio paese d'adozione. La mia relazione di oggi concerne i fraintendimenti e gli errori concettuali che affiorano dal tentativo di tradurre i termini giuridici sharaitici, tematica che ha interessato diversi giuristi comparatisti in diversi tempi e luoghi. Più precisamente, riguarda le difficoltà che si possono incontrare quando si tenta di trasportare o tradurre un lemma d'origine araba ad un'altra lingua. Mi riferisco all'arabo classico, intimamente legato alle fonti religiose. Giova precisare sin da subito che l'arabo classico è diverso dall'arabo colloquiale, il che rende difficile a volte individuare il significato del contenuto delle regole e delle clausole contrattuali. Talvolta possiamo pensare all'inverso, vale a dire la trasposizione in arabo, in diversi stati, del medesimo testo legislativo, redatto in lingua terza come il francese oppure l'inglese. In questo caso il contenuto non sarà mai identico in tutte le aree per le scelte lessicali di interpretazione adottate dai giuristi appartenenti a ogni singolo Stato. Talvolta assistiamo alla convivenza nella medesima realtà, territorio, di due lingue ufficiali, come il caso del Marocco, dove risulta come lingua ufficiale sia l'arabo classico sia il berbero, riconosciuta come lingua ufficiale dalla Costituzione marocchina solamente nel 2011. A dire il vero, esistono altri dialetti come l'arabo hassania, una varietà di arabo magrebino parlato andando verso il sud-est del Marocco. Di norma i magistrati nella realtà marocchina sono tenuti a utilizzare ed emettere i provvedimenti giudiziari e le sentenze in arabo classico, mentre nelle udienze è utilizzato l'arabo colloquiale, darija, lingua madre e naturale degli arabi francofoni in Marocco. Ne consegue che i cittadini che parlano solo il tamazirt, il tashlhit e il terifit, dialetti berberi, si trovano in una posizione di squilibrio, a volte anche quando vengono assistiti da un interprete, non è necessariamente qualificato, il che mette in discussione il diritto a un equo processo. Difatti, dopo il riconoscimento costituzionale, il disegno di legge emesso nel 2016 prevede che i litiganti di lingua berbera avranno il diritto di richiedere il servizio di interpretariato autorizzato dal Tribunale durante gli esami e le memorie senza pagare alcun compenso. L'interprete professionista riconosciuto dall'autorità giudiziaria avrà sia il compito di assistere i contendenti, sia il ruolo di assistere il giudice, perché non è detto che conosca la lingua berbera, nonostante la sua ufficialità. Ciò significa che l'arabo classico rimane la lingua della giustizia e che occorre garantire la presenza di interpreti qualificati per i cittadini che parlano unicamente il tamazirt. Pertanto il compito del giurista traduttore diventa difficile, poiché la mancata delimitazione puntuale del significato dei principi e dei divieti operanti nella vita sociale, economica, finanziaria e commerciale potrebbe portare a potenziali asimmetrie e squilibri contrattuali. Credo che si tratti di un argomento che oggi più che mai si caratterizza per importanti riflessi economici e commerciali. La trasparenza e la certezza delle clausole contrattuali consentono una cognizione puntuale dei doveri e degli obblighi assunti dalle parti e per l'effetto mettono al riparo da potenziali controversie. L'intento sotteso alla mia relazione è quello di ripercorrere con voi sinteticamente le problematiche che si possono verificare in caso di una trasposizione o traduzione imprecisa dei termini giuridici islamici. È noto che tra i numerosi problemi suscitati dalla intensa globalizzazione dei mercati, dove i confini territoriali si sono sfumati, vi è quello della traduzione del lessico giuridico da una lingua all'altra, una sfida tuttora attuale affrontata sulla base di diversi approcci e teorie. Difatti, il fenomeno o l'idea del binomio globalizzazione e diritto ha suscitato tante perplessità, poiché alcuni considerano l'uniformazione del diritto un mito. È altrettanto noto come la traduttologia giuridica si sia sviluppata come un ramo indipendente dalla comparazione giuridica, a partire dalle pionieristiche indagini del professor Rodolfo Sacco, e che attualmente la letteratura in materia, prevalentemente in lingua inglese, sia piuttosto corposa, essendo alimentata non solo da giuristi comparatisti, ma anche da linguisti impegnati in prima linea nelle attività di traduzione. Si tratta di uno sviluppo indipendente e naturale che si spiega considerando il forte tecnicismo del linguaggio giuridico, talora classificato come linguaggio tecnico-scientifico o tecnico-specialistico, e quindi differente dal linguaggio ordinario. Proprio tale caratteristica è considerata un ostacolo all'ideale della immediata comprensibilità delle norme positive da parte dei cittadini ed alimenta uno slittamento verso i linguaggi descrittivi che però accresce i problemi di interpretazione delle leggi. Tuttavia, la consapevolezza di queste problematiche ed i correlati approfondimenti scientifici appaiono diffusi a macchia di leopardo. Studi intensi vengono condotti in Canada, ove è molto avvertito il problema di tradurre i testi giuridici dall'inglese di common law al francese di civil law e di redigere testi normativi bilingue. Altra area fertile per la traduttologia giuridica è naturalmente l'Europa, o meglio le istituzioni europee che adottano ufficialmente il multilinguismo e debbono poi affrontare il problema delle lingue veicolari di lavoro mediante le quali comunicare al proprio interno. In entrambi i casi il focus delle analisi si concentra sui testi legislativi e regolamentari, lasciando così scoperto il versante contrattuale sul quale si registra l'attività di UNIDOA, peraltro anche essa rivolta al linguaggio paranormativo. Nella visione tendenzialmente globale del comparatista, il panorama a macchia di leopardo non si presenta solo in senso per così dire geografico, segnalando aree ed istituzioni fertili in cui la problematica della trasposizione dei concetti da un linguaggio giuridico all'altro è più intensamente coltivata accanto ad altre aree in cui la stessa problematica è trascurata. riguarda anche le diverse sfaccettature di quel fenomeno umano ipercomplesso che sinteticamente chiamiamo linguaggio. Considerando queste problematiche ben note alla comunità dei comparatisti, possiamo solo immaginare quali sarebbero i problemi di traduzione nella trasposizione di lessici di lingua occidentale alla lingua araba e viceversa. Qui è stata ed è tuttora dedicata meno attenzione. Difatti, la lingua araba comprende sia l'arabo classico, lingua del diritto islamico e del Corano, e l'arabo moderno, la lingua attualmente usata per la comunicazione formale e scritta orale. C'è un cambiamento. Giova precisare sin da subito che l'arabo classico è la lingua del fiqh, lo studio delle questioni che trovano riscontro principalmente nel verbo, il Corano e la Sunna. In questo contesto non rileva solamente la corrispondenza tra parola e concetto, ma sono da tenere a mente anche gli eventi storico-linguistici e le richieste avanzate a personaggi autorevoli della giurisprudenza islamica per chiarire i significati complessi di concetti contenuti nelle sacre scritture. Tale esercizio, come noto, trova attuazione mediante l'emissione di fatawe, pareri vincolanti. Si può citare come esempio il significato del concetto di califfato, khilafa, che è cambiato con i costanti mutamenti della storia e le sue implicazioni sul mondo islamico, non solo giuridiche ma anche sociali e politiche. Il lemma khilafa letteralmente significa sostituto, vicario e luogotenente, assunto solamente in seguito, dopo l'evoluzione del pensiero politico islamico, l'accezione di valore politico. Originariamente è un termine che risulta nel Corano privo di ogni legame con il significato politico, ma indicava che Adamo è vicario di Dio sulla terra. La parola assume un altro significato con la morte del profeta Mohammad nel 632 d.C. alayhi salatu wassalam, poiché c'era la necessità di sostituirlo non tanto sul piano profetico, poiché il profeta Mohammad alayhi salatu wassalam è considerato il sigillo dei profeti nella tradizione islamica, ma sul piano politico, guida della comunità. Alcuni utilizzano califfo e imam come sinonimi, ma a dire il vero assumono significati diversi e tale differenza si apprezza con riferimento alla distinzione tra sunniti e sceiti. Anche la parola imam, che vuol dire letteralmente colui che sta davanti, non aveva connotati politici originariamente. Ambedue concetti, khilafa e imam, califfo e imam, hanno assunto lo stesso significato nella misura in cui imam ha assunto il significato di colui che guida. Nei paesi di matrice islamica convivono il diritto positivo e il diritto islamico, ed in questo caso si pone il problema per il giurista occidentale. Considerare l'interpretazione del legislatore o l'interpretazione del mujtahid nel diritto islamico, colui che compie lo sforzo intellettuale per poter individuare la ratio della regola. Davanti alla traduzione dei termini appartenenti ad altri sistemi, il comparatista potrà seguire diverse strade. A volte la traduzione è garantita poiché sussiste una corrispondenza concettuale tra la lingua di partenza e la lingua di arrivo. Altre volte la soluzione puntuale e concettualmente più rigorosa è mantenere i concetti d'origine con i segni linguistici originari, senza cioè tradurli, come la parola sharia e la parola fiqh. In altri casi ancora bisognerà accertare le differenze di significato sussistenti e valutare il suo impatto sulla precisazione del discorso. Il comparatista dovrà quindi valutare l'introduzione nella sua lingua di nuovi concetti per rendere comprensibili i termini presenti nella lingua di partenza. Infine dovrà tenere in considerazione che l'arabo giuridico è a sua volta una lingua multiforme. Per esempio, se il testo giuridico è un contratto in cui ogni singola parola deve essere pesata, è saggio tradurlo in quella specifica varietà di arabo giuridico in uso nel paese di esecuzione del contratto, o la cui legge è scelta per regolare il contratto, considerando per esempio che l'arabo giuridico in Arabia Saudita non è l'arabo giuridico applicato in Tunisia o in Marocco o nel Nord Africa in generale, tenendo in mente la storia del pensiero geopolitico di ciascun territorio. Pertanto, gli strumenti sviluppati dagli studiosi comparatisti che considerano l'aspetto culturale e giuridico, due ambiti fortemente differenti, possono essere utili al traduttore del linguaggio giuridico arabo, lingua di partenza, al linguaggio d'arrivo. Dal momento in cui i paesi di lingua araba hanno assunto un'importanza crescente nell'economia globale, non ci si può esimere da una presa di coscienza delle specifiche problematiche che si pongono alla traduzione giuridica da e verso la lingua araba. Problemi che riguardano anzitutto i testi contrattuali, posto che rispetto ai testi dottrinari, giudiziari e legislativi, I problemi di traduzione in larga misura coincidono con quelli della comparazione giuridica e culturale di cui si occupa da tempo l'islamistica, anch'essa un ramo della comparatistica. Un segnale delle difficoltà che insorgono in questo settore può essere colto dalla diffusa rinuncia a tradurre, il che comporta l'adozione di testi contrattuali redatti in una lingua occidentale. La più gettonata è ovviamente la lingua inglese e la lingua francese per quanto riguarda i paesi del Nord Africa. Tendenza che sfocia nell'utopia dell'uniformità globale, del diritto dei contratti pensato e scritto in lingua inglese, secondo modelli del common law anglo-americano. Se però si rinuncia a perseguire questa utopia, e vi sono molte buone ragioni per rinunciarvi, è opportuno iniziare a fare un catalogo dei problemi specifici che la traduttologia giuridica incontra quando si confronta con la lingua araba. Al primo posto, tra le difficoltà che insorgono, merita di rimanere la diversa concezione del diritto che impera nelle tradizioni giuridiche occidentali, ormai completamente secolarizzate, e quella islamica, dove continua a sussistere un matrimonio indissolubile tra diritto e tradizione religiosa, e dove prevalgono le regole e i principi strettamente religiosi. Un chiaro esempio riguarda la traduzione del termine Sharia, intesa non solo come diritto tout court, ma col significato più ampio di legge. Attribuire dunque al concetto di Sharia la mera definizione di diritto sarebbe riduttivo per i connotati reali che questa parola assume all'interno della comunità islamica. Inoltre, quando si parla di diritto islamico, si fa riferimento a tre concetti profondamente distinti, Sharia, Fiqh e Qanun, che la traduzione appiattirebbe e omologherebbe restituendo unicamente il termine diritto. Un altro esempio lo si trova con riferimento alle equivalenze e dissimmetrie tra due concetti apparentemente molto simili, dal momento che spesso danno luogo a confusione o errate interpretazioni nel comparto finanziario islamico. Gharar, ossia ambiguità, incertezza assoluta o eccessiva aleatorietà, e jahala, ignoranza, attinenti agli elementi essenziali di un accordo. Il gharar copre uno spettro più ampio rispetto alla jahala, poiché, come detto, il primo attiene all'ambiguità e la seconda si limita all'ignoranza. Avere in mente la distinzione tra questi due concetti è rilevante, considerando gli effetti che derivano dalla presenza del gharar o della jahala nel contratto. E infatti, il contratto che contempli la jahala sarà annullabile, poiché si riferisce alla descrizione del contenuto, mentre in presenza del gharar questo sarà dichiarato nullo, poiché fa riferimento alla natura dello stesso. Altro esempio nella lingua araba è il meisir, letteralmente vuol dire gioco d'azzardo, e il qimar. Secondo i giurisprudenzi islamici, il meisir, che deriva da yusr, può essere definito come ottenere un utile senza attribuire alcun controvalore o indennizzo, iwad, mentre il qimar può essere identificato con l'incertezza portata all'estremo, ove l'utile dipende dalla fortuna e quindi da un rischio accettato a priori. Entrambe le nomenclature riconducono al significato del gioco d'azzardo. È possibile individuare il maisir all'interno di una serie di transazioni finanziarie e di schemi prodotti bancari convenzionali che le banche islamiche devono evitare a causa dei forti squilibri contrattuali, tali da renderli ingiusti, quali ad esempio gli strumenti derivati e i contratti dell'assicurazione convenzionale, ritenuti non sharia compliant perché contengono sia il gharar che il maisir. Sia il concetto del gharar sia il concetto del meisir vengono individuati negli scritti occidentali come il divieto dell'eccessiva incertezza e il divieto della speculazione. Ma come è stato evidenziato, sono due concetti che necessitano una spiegazione puntuale e contestualizzazione adeguata, poiché la loro errata individuazione può determinare l'invalidità delle transazioni finanziarie con implicazioni significative sul piano patrimoniale. Che si tratti di un settore alquanto difficile può essere testimoniato dalla constatazione che è frequente il ricorso alla scorciatoia consistente nella creazione di neologismi o innovazioni semantiche per poter esprimere tutti i connotati di un termine straniero. Ove invece la lingua araba sia lingua di partenza è frequente il mantenimento della parola araba non tradotta, accompagnata da una spiegazione del suo contenuto concettuale per veicolarne il significato al giurista occidentale. Sempre in funzione di prova indiziaria delle difficoltà che attendono il comparatista che voglia cementare con i problemi di traduttologia, che abbiano come referente la lingua araba, valga il dato di esperienza per cui, se è vero che da e verso l'arabo si è sempre tradotto, tuttavia la quantità di fraintendimenti e di errori che affiorano da tale corpus di traduzione è nettamente più elevato di quello che ricorre nella traduzione tra lingue occidentali. In questa sede, e sia pure senza alcuna pretesa di esaustività, lo scopo è solo quello di provare ad offrire qualche ulteriore delucidazione in merito alla complessità della questione in trattazione, dato che la trasposizione, la traduzione di un concetto giuridico islamico espresso in lingua araba non è solamente un'interpretazione tout court, oppure la spiegazione, ma è la trasposizione di un modo d'essere di ogni membro della comunità islamica. Oggi la trasposizione corretta dei parametri sharaitici in altre lingue merita un posto rilevante negli studi odierni, poiché la sua errata o poco puntuale spiegazione può comportare effetti negativi su diversi campi. Sia sufficiente pensare all'economia islamica e le relative operazioni, sovente di rilevante importo monetario, dove l'interpretazione errata o non precisa può portare alla laicità di operazioni che diversamente non le sarebbero. Grazie, spero di essere stata nei tempi e grazie per la vostra attenzione.
La ringrazio, veramente precisa nei tempi, e quindi apro alle domande, tante suggestioni ovviamente anche date dalla lettura relativa soprattutto al tema dei contratti. Io, se posso permettermi, intanto che aspetto di vedere se ci sono interventi sulla sua relazione, le chiederei anche, o meglio le darei uno spunto. Forse tutto questo sì, nell'ambito del diritto privato comparato, ma utilissimo anche nell'ambito del diritto pubblico comparato, perché, lo dico per esperienza, ma molte volte questa diversità tra le stesse lingue arabe creano difficoltà anche per chi deve lavorare su questo, in particolar modo soprattutto quando ci si trova a lavorare su sentenze. Molte volte le sentenze, così come le corti, le nostre corti oggi ci offrono la possibilità di lavorare anche o di conoscere in lingue diverse rispetto alla lingua diciamo della corte stessa. Poi abbiamo tra noi il collega Passaglia, di questo lui stesso lavora nella nostra Corte Costituzionale proprio per questo. Ma dicevo, ecco, molte volte è difficile invece affrontare queste sentenze in lingua araba, perché come diceva benissimo lei, da un paese ad un altro, mi sembra citasse, adesso non so, io ho letto recentemente Qatar, è completamente diversa rispetto ad altri linguaggi che vengono utilizzati da altre corti e sono difficilmente per noi raggiungibili. Quindi c'è anche questa parte come suggestione di aprirlo non solo all'ambito quindi del contratto, sicuramente, dove è molto interessante, dove è molto attuale anche per la diffusione di questo aspetto, ma anche sul versante, diciamo così, più proprio della traduttologia legata alla conoscenza anche del mondo arabo in maniera più ampia. Guardo se ci sono altre domande. Il professor Zenkovic, prego.
I hope I'll just put the question in English so the other panelists can understand more. I think that it's very your focus on the terminology of Islamic financial instruments is very important. We know in Italy, we know, but maybe this is less known abroad, that there's this very long tradition of studies on this topic of Islamic finance from the late Professor Castro and from Professor Piccinelli, who have worked a lot on this topic. But I think the most important aspect which makes it very practical, and this is why I encourage your research, is the role of Islamic finance and regional financial organizations. As you know, there is also among the various regional entities which are somehow related to the World Bank, there's also one of the of the Islamic countries. I think it's very important because they play an important role in international financial markets. They covered, at least from what I know, they cover not more than 2 to 3% of the world's financial assets, which are moved from one part to another. But 2, 3, that is a very, anyhow, it is a very important some. So I think that knowing if we in the West, where we have communities which take ask monies from Islamic financial institutions, well, it would be very important for us and for our regulatory authorities to know exactly what we are talking about. So this is just to encourage your research and hoping that it will soon come out into something that is published.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you.
Then I can ask a question then. When
yes, sir.
Okay.
Certainly.
I have a much more theoretical question in mind, because of course you concentrated yourself in your paper on problems of translation, but I'm rather interested in what it is left untranslated. I make you some examples. For instance, we almost never translated Tsar with king or emperor. We tend not to translate Kaiser as emperor. And indeed, we do not translate Allah with unique God. On many other terms referred to Islamic tradition. This is intriguing because Allah is not a name. So if we do not translate Allah, it seems a name, like Yahweh. But Yahweh is a proper name, Allah is not. Allah is simply God. So why we do not translate God, we do not translate Sharia, we do not translate even Islam. Islam is a word with a precise meaning, but it is left untranslated. So I presume that there is a strategy of exoticization in leaving many terms untranslated, or in over highlighting the difficulty of translation. The other is much more.
I mean, the Sharia. I mean, the Sharia. The term. It's very difficult. It's very difficult translation.
Okay. But do not concentrate, please. Since traduttology is always just case by case analysis of words, I'm interested in the spirit of Lawrence Venuti and other authors, critical authors about traduttology. I'm much more intrigued in finding more general remarks to make about translation in the legal field. And so there are terms we do not translate, even if they are difficult. But for instance, I don't think that God is such difficult to be translated. And so I would underline, and I wonder if this does not match a strategy of exoticization. So everything which is Islamic is in a way almost exotic. And indeed, I don't think that there is not too much Orientalism in comparative law. I think comparative law has a massive weight of Orientalism. Orientalism does not mean that we do not feel superior. Of course, Orientalism, as Seyed has clarified, is a way to mark our superiority, portraying ourselves as the center and the others as a periphery, whose words are so exotic that we cannot even translate. You can imagine, of course, also an Englishman can say, well, law is too difficult a term to be translated. You cannot match any Italian word exactly corresponding to law. Well, it's the same for Sharia and so forth. So I'm very interested, and I quit now, but in what is left untranslated, what are the choices behind translating or not translating, underlying difficulties or smoothing difficulties and so forth. If there is something more general to be said and not just single examples of thoughts. That's my point.
Excuse me, I have just problem with the internet. I don't. I'm so sorry, but but I can see just Sharia. It's not just term. Sharia is the life. It's very difficult speaking and the translation the term Sharia. It's very difficult because just any Muslim, Sharia, it's the God, because he has the principle of Quran and Sunnah. It's very difficult to make this, another term for Sharia.
Okay.
So I saw another question about Alessandro Somma.
Yeah, a very quick question, and in line with PG Monateri, are there many terms from the Western legal tradition which are not translated in the Islamic world, or is there more a tendency to translate, even considering the fact that many terms have big difficulties in finding out a correspondence?
Sharia.
Can I? Because this is exactly my point, and I don't want to just to leave, as always, traduttology in this kind of bric-a-brac as it is. Well, the problem is why I translate something. Everything is difficult to be translated. You can imagine the Greek word odos. It is way, it is rod, it is a way of life, of course, but we translate it. Whereas Tsar, is it difficult to remember that Tsar is the same term as a Caesar? No, it is not. But we leave Tsar. Well, so the Tsar is more exotic than the king. And so Sharia is more exotic as something else. And when we do not translate trust, it's just because of a strategy of exoticization of the common law vis-a-vis of the civil law, and so forth, and so forth. So I'm just pointing not to simple examples or to reversal. Well, also the Islamics are not translating all Western words, of course. But to think more in deep and detail, the strategy of translating and not translating, or living terms in original, or having them with a different level. Okay, I could make many examples, but much more general and certainly much more fit with the current paradigm in traduttology outside of the legal field. That's all.
If I may add something, my question was, my intention was to find out if exoticization is something which is typical of Western world or even also in other traditions. That was the sense, the general sense of
okay. I don't grasp it, but it's the same.
So a really interesting discussion. And now we have another panelist, that is Adriano DIRRI, and will talk to us about, today is from the University of Rome, La Sapienza, and he will talk about method, influences, and the language, underlining the role of South African constitution within Sub-Saharan African constitutions. Give you the floor. I remember you to briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. And I'm Adriano DIRRI. I hold a PhD at the University of Rome, La Sapienza. And actually, I'm in Switzerland for a scholarship, a postdoc scholarship at the University of Freiburg, Institute of Federalism. And during my PhD, my research was Africa comparative constitutional law, but mainly the problem of ethnicity, or so-called ethnicity, and federalism. Hence, it was crucial, the case of South Africa. I've been there for 6 months studying at the Dula Omar Institute with Prof. Steitler, Nicholas Steitler, and I learned a lot about the role of South African case and South African constitution. First of all, the role of South African constitution is very important due to the drafting, the constitution making, but also on decentralization. So before going into the depth of my presentation, I would like to stress that South Africa was a country totally divided, and it still is, substantially. And so I try to avoid the word ethnicity, because for me, ethnicity, recalling Prof. Yash Guy, is a political construct, is a way to exploit and to put an ethnic group one against the other. Moreover, in South Africa, the population was divided. It was the structure of the state was based on racial or on the color of the skin. And Prof. Yash Guy is meaningful in this, because in the history of Sub-Saharan Africa, after the independence, the word ethnicity meant, and still means, how to manage the unity of the state. But when you want to forge the unity of the state with the word ethnicity, you exclude someone else. The South African case is relevant for, I said, for the method in comparative constitutional law, which it has been highlighted several times. And I would like to stress again the contribution of the debate about the method of comparative constitutional law. But before, it was comparative private law. Someone else here has mentioned Rodolfo Sacco, and I would also mention Alan Watson and the debate with Legrand, as well as the contribution of Gunther Frankenberg. Pierre Legrand was the functionalist comparative constitutional comparative lawyer, and he said basically that a law can be applied in a society. But against this vision, there was the critic of Legrand. I guess all of you know what I'm talking about. But my critic against Watson was the use of the word of transplant. He used the word transplant, which for me is a mistake. And for example, we cannot talk about transplant every time. In some cases, it is true, like Japan or Iraq, even though there are differences. In the history of the constitution making of Iraq, for example, we can practically see what's happened there. I went into this case, and I found a lot of interesting memories, and also, for example, like Condoleezza Rice, Paul Bremer, so on and so forth. But I use, in this case, the word not transplant, but migration of constitutional ideas. And I guess Sweet Chaudhry is actually the best constitutional scholar, comparative constitutional scholar for this. And he just underlines that there are 3 examples of migration of constitutional ideas. And for example, the use of foreign law by constitutional court, which is normal in India and South Africa, first of all. Then the migration of constitutional principles among the supranational sphere. The Treaty of the European Union is one of the best examples in the Article 4 and 6. But my focus is on the use of a constitutional model in other countries. And South Africa is the cornerstone of the comparative constitutional law in Sub-Saharan Africa. So my perspective is basically culturalist, and my perspective is basically the same of that one of Gunther Frankenberg. And he said that constitutional information is transferred from a foreign context, then isolated and decontextualized and recontextualized. This is important because when we say migration of constitutional ideas, we see that there is a mixture between cultures in constitutional law. And South Africa is still one of the best examples in that. Not only because the type of federalism and decentralization, for example, draw a lot on the so-called Bundestreue, but also because the influence of South African constitution is clear in Africa and in countries like Zimbabwe, Kenya, but also Zambia, which are one of these countries we call exotic or foreign examples, not properly studied. First of all, the constitution making process is very famous. I guess all of you know what happened at that time. I know that Lucia SCAFFARDI, Prof. Lucia SCAFFARDI wrote an article on that, on the social rights. And, but I want to recall a bit Andrew Arato, which is a leading comparative constitutional scholar currently. And he speaks about the post-sovereign constitution making. Because the main features are the legal continuity between the previous regime and what is coming next. Two-stage constitution making process through the interim and the permanent constitution. The third is the inclusive negotiation and fora, so talks. And we know in South Africa, it was talks about talks. Then the role of the Constitutional Court, which is decisive, as in the case of South Africa, and the two certification judgments were the link between the first and the second stage. Then, of course, the elections at the beginning and at the end of the transition. And why he called this kind of constitution making post-sovereign? Because he said the role of the popular sovereignty is not as intended before. And he stressed that in South Africa, there was a constitutional court which had the task to judge if the constitution was in line with the 34 constitutional principles set as deadlock for the process. I want to recall also what the actual president of South Africa said during the negotiation, just for underline what happened at that time. Constitution making is a matter of time often, and South Africa is one of the best examples. The transition was very long, but it started in 1919 with the round tables. And during the most difficult stages, he said, I know it's late, but 20 minutes more, just 20 minutes for our constitution, which is for the next 20 years, no, 50 years, 100, 200 years, 20 minutes longer, become the Ramaphosa's mantra. This is how it went, basically. And it was. The underlining the constitution making process is meant to manage time, and they did, but not in an indefinite way, but not also in a short way, like the US did in Iraq, for example, or in Afghanistan. There are other examples, or in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They managed the time in the best way, but not only the time. They were able to include all minorities, including the NP, National Party, and the Zulu, with an inclusive participation, which is which is the mantra of the comparative constitutional court, comparative constitutional law in Africa. I want just to remember another thing happened there. The 34 constitutional principles were drafted by Prof. Francois Venter and Justice Arthur Chaskalson for the ANC. So it was inclusive. They reached a deal, as we know, and this deal was totally. Then the problem is, maybe I didn't read a lot by foreign academics, but in South Africa is underlined what's happened on federalism and decentralization. It was discussed by the Constitutional Court in the first certification judgment, If I don't remember if there are 200 or 300 paragraphs in the certification. But why it has become the meter for the whole Africa? First, theoretically, it's very hard to improve federalism in Africa because it can lead to secession or conflict. We know what's happening in the whole continent and still happening there. Then, how to arrange a proper decentralization? They found a way in a centralized federal system or a hybrid federal system, and based on the cooperation and collaboration. So that's why I talk about migration of constitutional ideas from Berlin to Cape Town, to Pretoria, to Bloemfontein. It becomes the pillar of the Constitution of South Africa. Article 41 embodies this principle. And alongside this principle, this kind of decentralization, the South African case is famous for the attention to local government. If we check Article 151 and so on and so forth, we can find a lot of constitutional provision dedicated to local government, because local government is the base of African society. And at the same time, provinces are very, very weak. And this model has been translated to other countries. For example, Kenya and Zimbabwe. But it's interesting that even though the political conditions of these countries are not the same of South Africa, constitutional advisor from South Africa, they try to put this model in other realities, but similar respect South Africa itself. For example, and just talk about the examples and then maybe everything is clearer. The preamble of chapter 14 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe says that there must be a devolution of power. But devolution in Zimbabwe is not properly easy, since it was dominated by one man, Mugabe, and now the situation is not properly different. But it's so interesting to see that as being included also cooperative government as well. But again, the political conditions are different. And has been set also intergovernmental relations framework, which it's important in divided societies. The Constitution of Zimbabwe has more similarities with South Africa, due also to the brutal apartheid regime, which was, of course, also in Zimbabwe. And there is another model, which is the Kenyan one. And Yash Guy said there was some form of plagiarism in drafting the Constitution, which is true. For example, on the objects of devolution, there is necessity to promote democratic and accountable exercise of power, to foster national unity by recognizing diversity, the participation of the people in the exercise of the powers of the state, and in making decisions affecting them, so on and so forth. This is incredibly interesting because how South African politicians, constitutional advisors, professors try to put this principle on the basement of other constitutions in Sub-Saharan Africa. But there is also, there are also other features, because is also the Constitution of Zambia has a long list of power, for example, for local government, local authorities. And why local authorities are so empowered in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Kenya, Zambia, and other constitutions like, infused by the South African spirit. Because through South Africa has been theorized the developmental local government. Local government is the basic feature of Africa, so they try to translate it, try to apply and enforce in the constitution. In Zambia, I said, which is the last example to sum up, it's really, really interesting because because the Article 147 set a list of principles that should guide the local government behavior and governance, which is the same of South Africa. And the constitutional provisions are similar to that one in South Africa. And more, and the last, I will mention that the Constitution of Zambia has exclusive legislative list for local government, like South Africa. So the operation of the South African constitutional advisor and lawyers is huge. What they do now in these years, and what they have done, it's incredible because they are trying to develop a constitutional culture from the bottom. In YouTube, for example, there is a very, very nice and short interview to Yash Guy, talk about a concrete case, which is the case of Kibera. Kibera is a part of Nairobi, full of poor people. It's, how they say, it's full of shacks. And, but there was a revolt against the government who was able to destroy this settlement. And he was on the side of the people, repeating several times participation, local government, and participation. I suggest to watch this interview. It's only 2 minutes because in 2 minutes, Yash Guy is able to underline the problem of Africa and link to constitutional law, comparative constitutional law, but also on the method to build through constitutions, the constitutional culture. So I try to underline this feature because when I've been there, I talk about also my experience. I felt that they are trying to do like that, something like that. Everything to do what they do is very hard, but I want also to mention that traditional law has not disappeared in South Africa. When we talk South Africa, we think on one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, so on and so forth. But when I was there, I was listening a presentation of a PhD. He was talking about the land, the right to land, and the role of traditional authority in the land rights. So they went there with the supervisor, Jaap de Visser. They went on the ground for interview to the chief of this community in Cape Town, in the Western Cape, so not in the Northwest. And they were sent back, and finished.
2 minutes
They
left.
were sent back because they didn't have any gift. So that's just for talking about the reality. And the last thing I want to say is that in Africa, after the 1990, entrenching federalism has been also a move to take back the traditional authorities, because during the colonization, they were suppressed in different ways. So I try to underline that the reality there is fluid, is interesting. I still don't understand why it's so neglected by most constitutional scholars, comparative constitutional scholars. And more has to be studied also in private and comparative private law. So that's, I try to underline these features, and thank you for this opportunity. The microphone.
Can you pardon? Thank you for your speech. It's always a pleasure to hear once more the important role that the South African Constitution played and still plays for our field of study. One question, and in the meanwhile, I want to ask, because I see that is connected, Professor Mancuso, that is really an expert on this subject. And so I will be more than happy if you want to give us questions about your speech. And I was, you speak about the use of process of decentralization as an example of empowering the local government in South Africa. However, it seems to me to have worked only to a certain degree wherever it has been applied outside of South Africa. For South Africa was really a good example, but outside, I think Kenya or other countries. Do you agree with this? What do you think?
I guess, okay, I guess that is not working well in Zimbabwe as first, but also because the constitution of Zimbabwe was drafted during the Mugabe era, not properly a decentralized man. And so the constitutional disposition on that are very, very scarce and are full of ambiguity. And when there is an ambiguous constitutional disposition, the center takes the lead. It's normal. In Kenya, it's still different because there are also counties, 47 counties. So in my opinion, what's happened in Kenya is something happened in Nigeria and Ethiopia, that with the empowerment of the subnational government, the local government tend to be suppressed. If you give in the constitution, the relevant constitutional disposition for local government, maybe there is the possibility that constitutional disposition help local government much more than the others. So, and what's happened in other countries, maybe not properly influenced by South Africa, is this. Nigeria is a perfect example, but also Ethiopia in different way, where there is a problem of the intra-minorities protection because, for example, the constitution of Oromo says that Oromos are the indigenous people. So this is also the problem of citizenship in Africa and property law, residency. It's huge, the problem, but in South Africa, they did very well, and they tried to do something similar abroad, but you know, it's a path. I hope that it will work some way.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Are there any other questions? No. No. So, okay. So now we have Marco Rizzuti, Dr. Marco Rizzuti from the University of Florence. And he will talk about individual rights and group rights in a multicultural order, the strange case of Miss Molla Sali versus Greek and ECHR.
Many thanks for the invitation. Many thanks, Professor SCAFFARDI, for your words. And I'm sorry if I joined the meeting with a few minutes delay before, but I was in a session of examinations online that are longer than normal examinations. So now I have to introduce myself. I am a researcher of private law at the University of Florence. And during some years of my postdoctoral researches, I've studied succession law and transnational successions. And
In fact, now I just want to share with you some comments, some remarks about a judgment of the European Court of Human Rights in a quite strange case about inheritance law. The case of Molla Sali versus Greece, they decided a couple of years ago in December 2018. This case is, in my opinion, it's interesting. That's why I've tried to study it, because at the same time, it involves a very general problem and a very country-specific question. The general problem is maybe one of the most debated problems in Europe today, but it is maybe also the first time that the European Court of Human Rights ex professo focuses on it. I mean, the problem of a balancing between multicultural integrations of different legal orders and the respect for the individual rights of the single individuals in the matter of family law and succession law. In other words, if and how Islamic law could be applicable in Europe in the matter of family law and succession law. Is Islamic law compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights or not? Or and in which sense? This problem is quite often debated because of issues related to migratory flows, to migrant communities, and this field of issues. We know that there are debates about the compatibility with the public policy or the public of some legal institutions, such as polygamy, repudiation, underage marriage, and a lot of similar issues in family law and succession law. But the strange situation is that the European Court of Human Rights has focused on this problem, compatibility of Islamic law with the European Convention, with regard to a specific situation that has nothing to do with the contemporary migration flows, but is referred to this very strange Greek situation, because pursuant to the treaties of the Treaty of Lausanne and other international treaties of the 20s, after the exchange of populations between Greece and Turkey, when all Greeks were expelled from Turkey and all Turks were expelled from Greece, or better to say, all Muslims were expelled from Turkey and all Orthodox were expelled from Turkey, because the exchange was on a religious basis. But by the way, the treaties provided for two exceptions for two legal communities that were authorized to remain, respectively, in Greece or in Turkey, and one of these communities, the Turkish community of Western Thrace, was allowed to apply in family and succession law its traditional law, that is Islamic law, instead of the Greek civil code. Both modern Greek and modern Turkey were a modern territorial state with just one territorial law, but with these few exceptions, they allowed an application of a personal status law. In its origins, it was a reciprocal exception. Then the exception made for a Greek community remained in Turkey, the Phanariotes disappeared, and only the other exception remained. And moreover, we have to consider that in the meanwhile, Turkey has totally abolished, almost totally abolished Islamic law as its internal law. So only this community of Turks in Greece continued to apply the Ottoman system of personal Islamic law, a sort of relic, of a fossilized relic of the old system. And it's not the system that is applied to all Greek citizens of Muslim religion, because in Greece there are also other Muslim communities, recent immigrants, but also the Turks of the Dodecanese, the islands that belonged to Italy and then passed to Greece. But in all the other cases, ordinary Greek civil code is applied. Only for this specific community of Turks of Western Thrace, this other personal, formerly Ottoman law is applied. And in our case, as I said, it is a case of inheritance law, because it is about the inheritance of a deceased Western Thrace Muslim who had bequeathed to her wife under public will, notarized public will, all his estate. The will and testament was perfectly in accordance with the Greek civil code, but the deceased sisters challenged the testament, arguing that under Islamic law, intestacy prevails on the testacy. So he had not the possibility to bequeath all the estate to the wife because a relevant share was reserved to the relatives, in this case to the sisters. After a lot of passages at the domestic level, the Greek Supreme Court, the Areios Pagos, said that this testament is devoid of effect because, pursuant to the international treaties, the law applicable to the case is not civil code, but Islamic law. And under Islamic law, as I read in the judgment, 3/4 of the inheritance have to be reserved for the relatives, in this case the sisters. And so the widow lost 3/4 of the inheritance. And that's why she lodged the claim with the European Court of Human Rights. She said for the violation of the Article 1, prohibition of discrimination, and the Article 1, Protocol 1, protection of property. In fact, she complained that she had been deprived of her property just because her predecessor husband was a Muslim, so she was indirectly discriminated against. Moreover, some non-government organizations intervened as third parties intervened in the procedure, asking to the European Court of Human Rights to ex professo declare that the application of Islamic law within a European legal order is dangerous for the human rights, and it has to be prohibited, it has to be contrasted. That's why this case assumed a wider dimension, not only the specific Greek situation, but also the intervention of this European non-governmental organization that had in mind probably not only the Greek situation, but also other developing phenomena of other European countries. First of all, the problem that is mentioned in their act of intervention of the so-called Sharia councils in the United Kingdom. Some arbitration tribunals that apply a sort of Islamic law within the migrant communities of Great Britain. Well, the court condemned Greece on the grounds of prohibition of discrimination, and she said that she has been discriminated against because of the religion of the predecessor husband, and moreover, the court found a violation of the right to free self-identification. Maybe this is the most interesting aspect, in my opinion, because according to the widow, when the predecessor husband drafted the ordinary Greek testament, he opted for the application of the ordinary Greek law, and applying the Islamic law just because of his birth within this community and without consideration for his choices. She said that the husband was not a baptized Muslim, was just born in the Muslim community, but then he lived like an ordinary Greek citizen and was not interested in the application of Sharia to his family and succession relationships. Therefore, applying compulsorily the Islamic law was, in the opinion of the court, a violation not only of the prohibition of discriminations, but also a violation of the right to free self-identifications. The court said that the state, the Greek state in this case, had the power to recognize a specific status to the individuals of a specific community in order to protect their group rights. But in the same time, the state has always to recognize to single individual a right to opt out, a right to ask the application of the ordinary law of the state, and not of the specific communitarian law of the minority, not the group. The application of the minority regime, the specific religious regime, must be a free choice and not a consequence of a birth within the community. This was the main argument of the court. And to conclude, which can be the impact of the decision? Probably in Greece, the impact will be very low because while the case was pending, Greece has already reformed its domestic law. The Greek legislature has abolished this specific status for Thracian Muslim, and it transformed the jurisdiction of muftis, that are the sort of Islamic courts. They're not technically judges, but they play a jurisdictional role. Well, they modified it, and this jurisdiction has become now merely optional in Greece. So Greece has in some way anticipated the decision of the court. Now, Islamic law is applicable to the community of Western Thrace only if all parties agree. If all parties agree to recur to this optional jurisdiction. And the other interesting aspect that was pointed out by some commentators and also by the third parties in the intervening organizations is what this judgment may say for other countries, for other European countries, because the court was asked by this non-governmental organization to say that the application of Islamic law is against the Convention on Human Rights. But the court didn't do this. The court said that the problem is non-discrimination and self-identification. That the court stressed on the point that the application of this specific status, the statute of Islamic law, must be made on a voluntary basis. But this may be, well, I say, this may also signify that if made on a voluntary basis, it is acceptable also inside the European legal order. So the case of the Sharia Council in the United Kingdom, the application of Islamic law through private international law and the acts of choices of law, other cases of private ordering within migrant communities and other specific cases, maybe can be indirectly legitimized, or at least we can have some doubts about them, because the court didn't say that the application of these rules is necessarily against human rights. The court just stressed on the necessity of voluntary basis. This is the most important point, because probably with the growth of migratory phenomena, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in other countries, we may encounter situations of private ordering or arbitration, Islamic arbitration tribunals or something like that, and maybe we will have to define how to recognize them or not. And according to the court, the most important issue is the right of opting out, the possibility for the single individual to avoid the application of this foreign or communitarian or anything else law, and to opt for the ordinary law. But the court didn't say that the application of Islamic law is in itself, because of its contents, against the Convention on Human Rights, as many other organizations asked the court to say. So maybe the most interesting part of the judgment is what the judgment didn't say. I suppose that my time is on the way, and I thank you very much for your attention, and maybe I can answer to your question if any. Many thanks.
Thank you to you. Really interesting, this case. I see some questions. First one is from Professor Richard Kay. I give you the floor.
Thank you. This was a very interesting talk and a very interesting case. I am somewhat confused about the solution as you describe it, and which also applies to the Greek law as it has been reformed. When you refer to the voluntary nature of the choice of the non-conforming law. In the case of a will, who must agree to this variation? Because the testator might wish to go one way, and the legatees, the people who are inheriting, might want to go another way. So does this mean that, in fact, the choice belongs entirely to the testator?
Many thanks for your question. Well, indeed, this judgment was criticized also for these reasons, because for example, given a German commentator wrote that the freedom to testate is not necessarily a fundamental human right. And so if the internal legal order of the state provides for some limitations in favor of relatives or something like that, it is not an issue of human rights to be totally free to the state. And this is a first issue. Moreover, as you said, who has to agree? Only the testator or all the interested parties? as far as I have understood about the recent reform of Greek law, of the one that preceded the final judgment, all interested parties have to agree to go to the jurisdiction of muftis. So if all the possible litigators agree, then they can go. So in this case, both the widow and the sisters of the deceased, if they all agree, they can go to the jurisdiction of the muftis. Of course, in this case, the widow will never agree to such a solution because in this case she would lost a lot of money. And if there is not a total agreement of all the interested parties, then the general law of the state, in this case the Greek civil code, will be applicable. So in this solution, voluntarily application means only if everybody agrees. But of course, it does not necessarily mean that this is the best solution at all. But I think this is the specific solution adopted in Greece.
And so the testator, the person who makes the will, has no choice in this matter. I can't, in my will, I can't demand that the Islamic law apply to any disputes on the inheritance which I'm creating. Is that right?
I'm not sure if I understood because of connection, but internet connection. But you said that in your testament you can write that I want some specific law to be applied or not.
Yes.
Something like that. Okay. Well, in this case, it didn't happen because the testator didn't say that nothing specific in his testament. The widow just said that, given that his husband was not a practicing Muslim, he was a secular person, he went to a Greek notary to draft the normal testament, then she deduced that he was not interested in the application of Islamic law. But maybe if another hypothetical testator makes a specific statement in the testament, it would be different, because in this case we have a specific act of self-identification. A specific, maybe in this case it could be a little bit easier to define which is the best solution. But also in this case, if we need the agreement of all interested parties, maybe it's possible that some counter-interested parties say, no, I don't want the application of this law. For example given, if we move from Greece to the international private law of European Union, that's something I know better than internal Greek situation. Well, the general rule of regulation 650 of 2012 about international private law of succession law is that the law applicable will be the law of the habitual residence of the testator. But the testator has also the power to make a choice of law, to indicate expressly in the testament itself or in another notarized will that he wants the application of something else. And in this case, the other law will prevail. Because in this case, we have a specific provision in European international private law. Indeed, I don't know exactly if inside Greece we have something like that, but as far as I understood, no. As far as I understood, in Greece after the reform, we can apply Islamic law only if all the possible interested parties agree, and because it is no more jurisdiction, it's just arbitration. And so if you want to go to an arbitrator and not the judge, all the litigators must agree on it.
Thank you.
So I can see another question from Alessandra Pera.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I would like to ask you if you have thought about the possibility to intend this right to self-identification as a sort of right to choose the applicable law, in the sense to identify the applicable law. So it's a sort of private autonomy choice in the case of the testament by the person, of course, the author of the testament. And in any case, in the pathological moment, it's a choice of the parties who are involved in the dispute. So do you think that there are really so hard situations which arise if there is the consent of the parties in the disputes?
Thanks. Well, the problem in the case was that in the original framing of Greek law, there was no choice, because just because of the belonging to the community, Islamic law was applicable. So that's why the European Court condemned Greece. Meanwhile, Greece has reformed its internal law, and now only with the agreement of all parties that Islamic law may be applicable. And I agree with you that in this case, the problems and the tensions are reduced, because if everybody agree, probably the solution could be easier to find, but it's not necessarily so, because in this case, we have quite a rather technical problem of inheritance law. And maybe it's possible that if everybody agrees on a division of 3/4 against 1/4, why not? But in other cases, we can have more problems. Is it okay that if everybody agrees a polygamous marriage is valid?
No, no.
It could be a case of application of course, I've chosen a more stronger example, but
sorry, it wasn't my point. Probably my speaking was not so clear. What I mean is, okay, there is a testament, and we have the free will of the testator saying, okay, I'm Islamic, and I want that Islamic law would be applicable to my inheritance and to all the situations which arise from the testament. And this is one hypothesis. Then we have another hypothesis, and there is a pathological situation where all the heirs are disputing on something, and one of them is asking for the application of Islamic law, and the others don't want, because the solution would be negative for them, probably, okay? If I understand correctly. But what I want to say is, as long as we are talking about, in a certain way, the clash between personal law and state law, so the law applicable to all the people in the state, can you think about this right of self-identification that the court use in order to argue as a sort of right to manifest private autonomy in one sense or in another? Of course, if you don't have the agreement, there is no way to apply Islamic law in any case.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
I think that I agree with you that in this case, private autonomy is a sort of instrument to express self-identification. Through private autonomy, a person self-identificates and chooses the application of a law or of another law. And I can make just another example in inheritance law. I think it could be connected with it at least from an aspect. Well, a judgment of a German court, if I remember correctly, the Hamburg Landesgericht, about an Iranian testator, at least an Iranian deceased. I don't remember exactly if testator or just intestacy, but it doesn't matter. Iranian law was applied because of the situation, and in this case, because of Iranian law, the share of inheritance for the male son was twice the share of inheritance of the female daughter. And then she recorded to the German court, but the German court said that it is not necessarily against public policy, because if the German law was applicable and the father gave all the disposable share to the male son, then the same concrete results would be achieved. This decision was very criticized, but I think it is quite interesting because the German judges looked only at the final concrete outcome of the division of the inheritance. If a German father has to reserve a share to each son and then is free to give the disposable share everybody wants, then it may, in this case, it may give all the disposable share to just one son, and in this way, this son will acquire twice the share of, in this case, the daughter, or anyway, the other son. As I said, this decision was very criticized, and as far as I know, the more recent German case law is different. Today, German case law said something different. They say that the testator can how to say, discriminate when dividing the inheritance, but the law cannot. We cannot accept a law that discriminates between the heirs because of gender, even though we can accept that the testator is free to divide, at least within the limit of disposable share, the parts of his inheritance. And in this case, we have a clash between the private autonomy of the testator, of who wants the application of, example given, Iranian law, and the public policy, the public policy principle of gender equality in the German case. In the Greek case, we had not this problem for a specific circumstances of fact, probably just because in the Greek case, all the litigators were women, both the widow and the sisters. So in many cases of clashes between Islamic law and Western law, we have problems of gender equality, or better to say, we have problems of discrimination against women. But in the Greek case, it was not the problem because all litigating parties, for a matter of fact, not for other reasons, were all women. So it was not possible to interpret the situations through the lens of gender discriminations. But maybe I'm just going too much far from your specific question. Anyway, I agree with your point about private autonomy and self-identification. Thanks again.
Thanks again for this interesting sentence. And now, last but not least, sorry. Oh, sorry, Professor Vincenzo.
Very rapidly. Just 3 points for, but I'm not asking for a reply from RIZZUTI. First, just to point out that we have a very rich case law in Italy in the times in which Italy had colonies, colonial times, both Libya and Dodecanese. And as a matter of fact, if you go to Rhodes and you go on the main street in Rhodes, you see still there Tribunale Sharītico, and you find a whole lot of, and if you look at it, there's quite a lot of case law concerning, obviously, Italian courts applying Islamic succession law. Second point, self-identification. I suggest you keep in mind the decision of the Italian Constitutional Court concerning the tax levied from a member of the Jewish community. And the Italian Constitutional Court said that you must, although you are enrolled, you belong to the, you are ex officio, you are put in the Jewish community, you must decide you want to be there, and therefore you have to pay the taxes. So that's interesting. And the third point, which is somehow related, we have talked a lot about the effect of Molla Sali for other Islamic communities in Europe, but I would like to point out that this raises a very significant point, and I think Richard Kay is well aware of this, of the role that Jewish courts have, especially in family matters in the US, especially in New York. We have a whole lot of enormous amount of litigation in New York, rabbi courts there. So it's not only a question of Islam, it's also a question of Jewish family. And I don't know, I know more about family law now, I don't know about succession. But also this is a perspective that should be taken into account when analyzing the Molla Sali decision. Just 3 ideas for your paper, which when it sees the light.
Many thanks, many thanks.
Thank you for these 3 ideas, very interesting 3 ideas. And the last one, but not least, is Seyed Mohammad Amin ZAVAREI from McGill University in Montreal. So good morning to him, because if I'm in,
Almost noon.
Are you in Canada?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so it's morning now. So good morning. And you will talk us today about contract law theory and the idea of social interdependencies, a study in classical Islamic law. I give you the floor or the camera, as you prefer.
Thank you. So I am Seyed Mohammad Amin ZAVAREI. I'm a doctoral candidate at University Faculty of Law. First of all, I want to actually join my colleagues in thanking the chair, Professor SCAFFARDI, and the organizing committee for this opportunity. This is actually my very first conference that I have the opportunity to present my work in, and therefore it's actually very exciting and stressful at the same time for me. And I'm sure all of us wish that we were able to gather in Italy and meet in person, but still I'm very grateful for this opportunity. So what I'm presenting to you today is actually very much an ongoing research, and it's part of my doctoral thesis, which I have started not that long ago. And I am aware that as I go forward, probably some of my arguments might need to be redefined. And because of that, I actually highly appreciate your comments and insights about my arguments. Because of the pandemic, actually, I faced some difficulties because access to resources has been extremely limited. Most sources that I work with are printed and are not available online. And that was a challenge for me, and I don't know actually for how long the situation will go on, but I hope that it will resolve soon. So to give you a background on the research itself, the idea of my thesis, which my thesis is about reconstructing a theory of contracts in classical Islamic law, came to me when I was doing a paper for my LLM degree on actually contractual structure in Islamic finance. And there I noticed a lot of inconsistencies in the use of classical Islamic commercial structures as it is practiced today in Islamic finance. And you see that actually like these commercial structures transform into a mere replication of the structure for conventional finance. So again, my goal in the thesis is to reconstruct a theory of contracts classical Islamic law and put it into conversation with different traditions, because classical Islamic, especially, it's understudied and underrepresented tradition. We might be able to find some answers for the questions that we are facing today that are transsystematic and transhistorical. This research that I'm presenting to you today is part of the first part of my thesis, actually, in which I try to answer two separate questions about contract law, which is suggested by Professor Stephen Smith. The first one is an analytical question about what is a contract, what is the nature of contract, and the second one is actually the normative part of the contract theory, which today I'm more talking about contract, the normative part, but at the same time, sometimes I have to refer to the analytical question as well, but it will be really minimal because it's ongoing research. So generally in Quran, there is a verse about obligations, which has been widely used in contemporary discussions on Islamic law, and that says fulfill your obligations. And for the word obligations, actually, it is used as uhud. And if you ask today, probably Muslims, what is an aqd? Probably they would just translate it as a contract. But in fact, uhud in themselves are not contracts. They are generally a word that is used in classical Islamic law for any kind of obligation. Although there have been more, sometimes some jurists use them more to refer to bilateral transactions, which includes marriage, includes any kind of other commercial transactions. For that reason and historical reasons, actually, the classical jurist did not offer a general theory of contracts because they were actually more concerned with the practical aspect and answering the questions that arise from the daily life of the followers rather than developing a general theory at the time. This lack of a general theory offered by some jurists actually led some scholars, including Coulson, to argue that there is no general theory of contract because classical Islamic law was still at its early stage of development, and therefore we have to wait for that moment to come. It's still not there. But at the same time, this is not really a convincing argument, because if you look at other areas of law, classical jurists actually went into a detailed discussion about justification of positive rules in their usul work. And there are also some norms used in Islamization of pre-Islamic contracts in order to make them Islamic. And this actually led, from this Islamization, we can get a hint about some of the theory, general theory that they had in mind. So how Islamic law developed actually was into a scheme of nominate contracts. So if you open a classical manual, you don't see a general headings of contracts. It's just like starts directly by bay, which is a contract of sale, then goes to ijara, and then goes on and on. This categorization also led some other scholars to argue that there is no general theory of contract, but rather there are theories of contracts, which means that each nominate contract has its own theory, which is completely separate from the other nominate contracts. One of the main arguments they had was that they were arguing, because of this categorization, this means that there is no concept of freedom of contract in classical Islamic law. But this is also not a convincing argument, because some prominent classical jurists, including Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, they were strongly defending the concept of freedom of contracts. Because actually they believe that the humans are given a broad permission to just manage their daily life. There is no need for an external source, for the law to be involved in that. Unless there is explicit prohibition, then we should not actually get involved into the contractual system of people. Again, this is just one argument by a prominent jurist. There are different arguments there too. So if you look actually at the literature on theory of contracts in classical Islamic law, we barely have any literature. There are a few. Most of the types that you can find, most of the arguments are hidden within books that are not on classical or on Islamic contract law theory, but rather on, for example, Islamic finance or Islamic economy. In these literature, actually, we can trace two types of general theories of contracts. The first type, they go around the idea of efficiency. They argue that for classical jurists, actually, contracts were there, and their normative aspect was to promote efficiency. They have a few arguments that I just skimmed through. The first one is that they argue that actually these structures, classical structures of Islamic law, they were extremely attractive for the time. So even like, for example, Jewish traders, a lot of them would rather be engaged in these kind of, in the classical scheme of contracts, rather than using what was available for them at the time. So they also offer a lot of efficiency-related justification for mainly two prohibitions, two really important prohibitions in classical Islamic law, which is prohibition against usury and prohibition against a certain level of uncertainty. And they argue that because of the situation of the market, because how the market was at the time, these prohibitions were actually helping the market to be more efficient. So for them, the normative goal is to enhance efficiency according to the best benefit analysis available to the pre-modern jurist. On the other spectrum, there are people who are actually arguing for unjust enrichment as the normative value of contract law in Islam. Again, they focus on Islamization. They say both riba and gharar, which was the prohibition against usury and against uncertainty, they root in unjust enrichment. That's the reason why God imposed them on humans. And they situate their theory within a broader theory of moral economy, which is actually fundamentally different from what we can find today. But in my view, both of these theories, semi-theories, they fail to explain many areas of contract law. Where I look to find the normative foundation is actually in the significant role of social interdependencies in the view that was advanced by classical jurists. So I'm going to go on actually on focusing right now on just two classical jurists, Al-Ghazali and Ibn Abdus-Salam. So I'm just going to give you a background of how Ghazali views generally like this war. So for Al-Ghazali, the goal of life is the next one, actually, not this one. So this life is just a stepping stone towards the next life. So whatever we do here is for the next life. And God created humankind in a way that they are in need of each other for realization of their needs in this life. And necessity of contracts therefore stems from the need of humans to satisfy their worldly needs. And this is generally just possible by the institution of contracts. Ghazali also argues that the law will create an environment where people's rights are defined and therefore disputes are minimized. In his discussion of the explanation of the nature of the world, Al-Ghazali actually defines the world as two existing corpora and divides them into separate categories. So he says there are two corpora. One is earth and second is what is on earth. And he goes on actually to say that all this creation, all this classification is centered around how each group of corpus addresses a different type of human needs. He explains actually how each category is desired by humans for the satisfactions of their needs. For example, he divides what is on Earth into three classes: mineral resources, plants, and animals. And he explains actually how you need each one of these three to satisfy the need that you have. We can actually, this interdependence that we see in Al-Ghazali's thought, we can see that it stems from two distinct needs of humans. The first one is the survival of human generation. And the second one is cooperation in preparation for necessity materials that we need for life, including food, clothing, and what we need to raise our children. The first one, the survival of human generation, is satisfied by marriage, and the cooperation by transactions. This conceptualization of interdependence in Al-Ghazali's thought corresponds actually to a general framework of obligation offered by Ibn Abdus-Salam. I'm just going to quote him here. God, most exalted, created humans and made some dependent on others, so that each group of people would look after the other. For Ibn Abdus-Salam as well, the necessity of regulation of human interactions actually stems from the interdependence and interrelation that is there for mankind. He further argues that humans can only realize their worldly needs by engaging with each other. And preservation of economic and social welfare of society requires regulation of conferral rights, whether in the form of exchanges or voluntary transfer, which in turn is essential to preserve life and property. So in the beginning, I mentioned that there is also an analytical question about what are contracts. So far, my argument is that contracts in classical Islamic law are not promises, unlike what we consider today that contracts are promises generally, but rather they are actually transfer of entitlements or rights. Again, this will raise some questions about what are these entitlement rights, what is the concept of right in classical Islamic law. It is something that's ongoing in my research. I don't have the answer, to be honest, right now about it. So in this system or contracts, they function as the legal framework for the voluntary transfer of entitlements. Resources are not divided equally, and humans need each other for the realization of their needs, and contracts are there for this function. Initial acquisition and involuntary transfers are subject to a different set of rules, such as Seyed, which is for hunting, or Qasd, which is for unlawful possession or interference with someone's property. This most basic manifestation of the concept of contract as transfer is actually, we can find it in a juristic definition of nominal contracts. Most, if not all, nominal contracts are defined in a way as they would suggest that there is a transfer in them right at the moment of formation of contract. For example, bay, which is the contract to sell, is defined as the transfer of the ownership of a property to another person in exchange. Also, for example, gift is also defined as the transfer of ownership of a property without an exchange. There actually, we can see that almost all contracts in classical Islamic law, they stem from 4 types of nominate contracts. There are either exchanges involved, or there are no exchange, and it's either for the usufruct or it's for the corpus. And therefore, we have 4 categories of nominate contract. This is the basis for all other contracts. So based on that background about analytical question, and we talked about how contracts are there to fulfill human needs. Without contracts, then this fulfillment would be substantially impaired. It is true that in primal societies, this need was not significant, but as we go forward, as we have a society that they live in each other and with each other, and as actually Al-Ghazali goes into a great detail in discussing about how every part of society, from a family to another family, from a judge to a citizen, from government official to everyone in a society, from villages to villages, they actually are in need of each other. So we need an elaborate system of contractual obligation because of this need. But how contract law actually in classical Islam facilitates and protects these corporations, this is when actually the idea of markets come in. Which is the next step in my research. I'm just going to give you a general idea about it. Contract law protects the social conventional markets for classical jurists, and markets are valuable, are morally desirable because of the role they play in this cooperation, in the facilitation of interdependence. So with this general framework, now we can actually justify a lot of rules that are in classical Islamic law. Right now, I'm just going to go actually because of the time through just one example, which is the general prohibition imposed in classical Islamic law on contracts. We can trace all the prohibitions almost into two groups. The first groups are the prohibitions that are related to the object of the contract, which goes to the analytical question that we talked about. If no entitlement, if no rights to an object, or if there is no right, cannot exist based on the legal system, therefore no transfer of those rights can be available. But what's more important here for our purposes is the second group of prohibitions, which are related to the deficient nature of transactions. And these are mostly associated with two general prohibitions that we talked about, prohibition on riba, on usury, and qarar, on uncertainty. In this case, contract law protects the social convention of markets in general. And markets, why do markets need protection? Again, because they are needed for the facilitation of interdependence. We can see a lot of these examples. For example, there's another general prohibition in classical Islamic law, which says that you cannot actually go out of the market, go like out of the city to buy products from the traders who are coming to the city to offer their products for the market, because that would actually, again, intervene with the normal process of the market. With that, actually, I conclude my presentation, and I'm very much happy to hear your insights and comments. Thank you.
Thank you to you. Are there any questions?
I don't think I was that good, but.
Yes, Professor Kay? We cannot hear you. Please switch on the microphone, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I was listening to you talk about the question at an early stage of whether there were general contract rules or simply a collection of individual transactions. You probably know this, but I wondered whether, in fact, you had considered in that connection Grant Gilmore's book on death of contract, which makes pretty much the same argument about common law.
Yes, I'm aware of that. Generally, like the concept of death of contract and like death of freedom of contract. But however, I don't agree, as I said, with the fact that contract was like that in classical Islamic law for the jurist. We can see actually there were actually general trends that you can reconstruct the theory of contracts from them.
Of course, Gilmore has been very much criticized and effectively criticized in many respects, just exactly along the same lines. It's interesting how we find the same kinds of arguments in different systems.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now there's a question from Professor Alessandro Somma.
Yes, thank you. When you talk about the rise of the idea of market in the Islamic world, of course, you mention some exceptions towards the Western idea of market, but you also use many I also use a terminology which is very familiar to Western law, efficiency, for example. And I would have expected a more differentiated language, or a reference to other values, which I would like, because I'm critical towards an idea of market being too much controlling private lives. Is this just your approach, or is this really what you find out in literature?
No, actually, well, depending, in these groups that I talked about, when they talked about inefficiency, they actually use the term market. But generally, my approach is to try to actually, as much as I can, I'll try to use not the original Arabic terms, because most of the time they actually create this sense that these ideas are so fundamentally different from each other. Even though, like, if you look at the term market, what was market, for example, 1,000 years ago in Europe, it's probably different than the concept that we consider as a market today. But still, we can still talk about these terms in a way that are relatable to us. In my research, generally, I tend to use the words that, even if there are, the concept might be a bit different, I usually just rather to say just in a footnote once and use the term throughout my research.
Okay, thank you.
I can see another question from Anna Suzuki Klassen. Is it correct? Anna? I can see the hand. We cannot hear you. If you like to give a question, probably you need to switch on your microphone, because we cannot hear you. Anna Suzuki? I'm sorry, probably is not more with us. We have a technical problem. So I'm sorry about this, but
maybe she can send a message on chat. If Anna Suzuki Klassen can send a message on the chat, or on the question and answer. At the bottom of the screen, you see there's a question and answer.
Yes, I see, but there's no, I am sorry for the trouble she read, but can you write your answer? I can read for you if you prefer.
Maybe it was a question for previous.
I would like to ask about the contract theory in classical Islamic law.
Yeah, about which aspect of contract law?
No. You mentioned that contracts are not considered as promises, but as transfers of property.
Transfer of rights, rather, not necessarily property. Again, I mentioned that this is a part of the research that's still ongoing. I haven't done the complete research, to be honest, here. But considering the idea of promise, the contract as promise in classical Islamic law, then it will actually be extremely challenging for us to then justify that many prohibitions or rules that are there. Generally, actually, what we see is that a promise to do something, again, there are different opinions, but it's generally not enforceable, just the promise in itself, if it's outside of this nominal contractual scheme. And also, like, the form that the manifestation of the consent that it's required in classical Islamic law, it's always in the past tense. So even like when you think of promise, it's usually you say, okay, I will do this and that, and then you will do this and that. But using even like the future tense in classical Islamic law will lead you generally to not having a contract at all.
Okay, thank you. I see, thank you. So, are there any other questions? No, I cannot see. No, So thank you very much to our panelists for the interesting contribution of this afternoon, and thank you to all those who follow with interest and participation our meeting. I hope to see you all in person one day, and I hope to do this very, very soon in Italy or in Canada or in America or elsewhere, I don't know. Thank you very much for this interesting afternoon and for this interesting morning for American people.
If I just may butt in, just to remind everybody that next week we have the third week of webinars on Thursday, the 11th at 10 a.m. Central European Time. We have the session on new challenges to human rights protection, Chair Cristina Costantini, and on next Friday, systemology. It's at in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the chair is Professor Monatelli. Just to remind you what our next appointments and engagements are of this cycle of webinars. That's it, and thank you also from all the organizers and organizations of these webinars.
See you soon.
See you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, many thanks.
Bye.